Boy, the pressure's on. Now I got to come up with something funny too, huh? The phenomena of spiritualism was first known to us in 1848. But the phenomena of spiritualism, although not called spiritualism, has been around since the beginning of time. Back in the day, ancient man worked very closely with nature, and what he didn't understand, he deemed as supernatural. And this laid the groundwork as time went on. The evolutionary process of our growth, what happened was people like Socrates and Plato and Aristotle and Hippocrates came along and began to look at nature and classify it and document those classifications. And so we had the beginning of what we eventually wound up calling scientific proof. We didn't invent science, but what we did was we defined science. Now, there's a rub there. At least there is for me. Because the definition of fact, scientific proof, is man-made. It's not God-made. Science is. There is no question about it. But the way we define science and how we classify what we call scientific proof is man-made. That definition is man-made. So, what does that consist of? That consists of a factor other than the fact that we document and we classify and we try to look at things in an orderly fashion and put that stuff down on paper. What defines these things as fact is a repeatability factor. So given the same circumstances in a laboratory setting, given the same circumstances, if A, then B, then C happens. And there is no deviation off of that. And that's kind of what I have a problem with. Because with regard to spiritualism, nobody really questions spiritualism as a religion, do they? We don't hear much about that. And nobody really questions spiritualism as a philosophy. But when it comes to us speaking about spiritualism and defining spiritualism not only as a religion and a philosophy, but also as a science, the scientific community has a problem with that. And that's in direct relation to their inability, well, I shouldn't point fingers, but I am, the inability, let's say, for science to be able to recreate this repeatability factor when it comes to mediumship. And really, from my perspective, and I'm just sharing opinion with you, I was thinking about that, and I was thinking about the 4 seasons that we experience here. And we have spring, summer, fall, and winter. So, the summertime, some summers are hotter, drier, wetter. Some winters are colder, have more snow, have less snow, etc. And yet science doesn't have a problem saying that the 4 seasons are fact, do they? But when it comes to mediumship, Well, let me back up before I tell you about mediumship and say, we know that every second in time is in flux. It's changing, right? Every second, every minute, every hour, every day, every week, and so on and so forth. Not one minute in time is exactly the same as the next minute in time. That doesn't exist, because the whole of the universe as we know it is evolving, it's changing, it's morphing into, we don't know yet. There's so much we don't know, so much more we don't know than what we do know, right? So, if we have a conversation, you and I, and tomorrow I come to you and we have a I try to have that same conversation with you, or continue that conversation, is it going to be exactly the same as it was the day before? No, it isn't. But is it a fact that we've had a conversation twice? Yeah. Now, who occupies the spirit world? People. People. It's not really a mystery. We don't know exactly all the nuances of the spirit world, but what we do know, the little bit that we do know, we know that those who live in the spirit world, because of the continuity of life and what we've learned through mediumship, is that the spirit world is made up of people just like us, minus our physical bodies. You've heard, probably most of you have heard, that what we are is spirit today, as much spirit today as we ever will be, except we're encased. Sometimes I feel like it's an entrapment, right? More than an encasement. But we're encased in this physical body. So when we go to spirit, what happens? We retain our personal identity. And I often say when I'm doing messages or spirit greetings, you know, if Uncle Joe wasn't a good money manager when he was here, when he goes to spirit, don't ask him what to invest in the stock market, because he's probably going to screw things up for you, right? So we don't become all knowing and all powerful and all somebody else than what we already are today. All right, so back to science and mediumship. This is kind of harsh, but you know, so many times people say, Elaine, don't hold back, tell me how you feel. So I'm going to tell you that, you know, science, in my understanding, talks a little bit out of both sides of their mouth, because if they accept the change of seasons and so many other things, they accept communication. Yesterday we communicated, it wasn't exactly the same as it will be tomorrow, or the day after, or today, but it's still communication. If they accept this as fact, why do they use mediumship and they say, well, we get stuck on mediumship because given the same room, given the same environment, the lighting, the temperature, the people that are participating in spirit communication or trying to produce phenomena, today they get a message, if you will, possibly, if spirit's available, from spirit, and tomorrow they might get a different message. And science goes, oh, there you have it. Nay, nay, this is not factual. Because we used the same room, the same people, Everything was exactly the same. The lighting was the same. The temperature was the same. Everything was exactly the same. And yesterday this happened, and today this is happening. And that repeatability factor doesn't exist. Therefore, we can't get behind mediumship. We can't definitively say that mediumship is factual. So, where does that leave us? Well, there's light at the end of the tunnel, as they say. Now that I've kind of trash-talked science pretty heavily, I'll see if I can't smooth things over a little bit. For many, many decades, science looked at things through a microscope. You know, they were very intent. The scientific community was very intent in pulling things apart. What makes it tick? What are the component factors of matter? You know, is this book in motion? Is it standing still? What makes this, what is the elements? What are the elements of this book? And we figured that out, right? We broke it down and we got the atoms, and that wasn't good enough. We split the atom and we did God knows what else. Anyway, what happens when you look through a microscope? What happens to everything else outside of that vision? We don't have it, right? When you're looking through a microscope, what are you seeing? You're seeing a world. It can be one particle, one little thing, but that's your entire world when you're looking through a microscope, isn't it? That's the entire thing, because all else you're not seeing. It's like you have blinders on, right? Okay, so now we've kind of figured a lot of that stuff out. The small world, right? The atoms and splitting atoms and so on. And now what's happening is science is expanding their vision. And they're looking at things from a different perspective. So let's use a helicopter as an example. You're up here in the air in a helicopter, and you're looking down upon roadways, right? And they're all coming together. And you see two cars. One is coming from this direction, one is coming from this direction. And you're seeing them from the perspective of the helicopter. And you can pretty much see that if one of them doesn't give, because they're both traveling at the same rate of speed, they're going to collide, right? And you can see that. But the two people in the car can't see that because they're operating from a different perspective, right? They're seeing things through a smaller window rather than a bigger window. Now, to see things only through a bigger window, you're only hitting the highlights. It's kind of like washing the floor but not getting the corners. Now, if you're seeing things from a microscopic perspective, a very small perspective, all the corners get clean, but the middle of the floor doesn't get taken care of. So there's got to be a balance between the two. What does all this have to do with spiritualism? You've heard the expression, no man is an island. It's a little outdated because they use the word man, right? What about us? No man is an island. Because of your genetic influences, and I'm going to sidebar and tell you something I read that was very interesting. It's not only your genetic influences, but within your DNA, science has now learned that you can have mental traits that are reproduced from your ancestry, and it can go back generations. So that's pretty interesting stuff. They did it, of course, with rats first, but it's applicable because they're working on experiments right now that are indicators that this is the case. So here you are with your genetic makeup and your whatever you've brought forth and from your ancestors and whatever you've learned in the environment and whatever has influenced you through your upbringing and so on, where you were born and all of that, put all of that together. And from that, you base your perception and you think about things. So I'm going to think about something this way, and you're going to think about the same thing. If I say, let's think about this, some of us are going to focus on the container, and some of us are going to focus on the light, and some of us are going to focus on the base, and we're not going to see it exactly the same, are we? That's why we don't see accidents and stuff exactly the same, because it's how our attention focuses. Well, in spiritualism, what we know is that we are a family. And when I say in spiritualism, not only a spiritualist family, what I mean is humanity is a family, right? And so you can only think of something in your own head, in your own way, as it aligns with your own belief system. And if anybody was here the last time I was here, I taught you a new word. It was called Bitfar, or Bitford. Do you remember that, some of you? It was let me see if I can do this for you. Beliefs, ideas, thoughts, values, opinions, and rules. Bitford. So all of those things you have from only one perspective, unless we talk to other people and we get their perspective on things. Now, the good news and the bad news. How wonderful it is to be able to share ideas and share different belief systems and values and ideas. But very often, we perceive that as an invitation for conflict. Instead of celebrating our differences, what happens is when we bump into somebody else's ideas that are different from ours, the guy's a jerk. He doesn't know what he's talking about, right? He's an idiot. That's where we need to maybe think in a little bit differently. And spiritualism supports, very strongly supports self-culture and growing beyond the need for conflict. See, life doesn't happen to you, it happens through you. And you will not cling to something that creates discomfort in you outwardly until you no longer need it, till you no longer need that experience. Nothing can affect you, but only to the extent that you choose to allow it to affect you, to cling to it, to hold on to it. So, what do we do with all of this stuff? I think we need to communicate differently. I think in order for us to grow, and because we're all here, and God bless you, and I'm so glad to see everybody here, because that means that, as far as I'm concerned, you're part of a very elite group of progressive people in this world that want to do better as a whole. The way that we communicate differently is we find some common ground. Instead of taking our focus to what we do differently with one another, I'm talking about all of humanity now, right? The wars and all the stuff that's going on in the world. Instead of focusing on what we do differently, the challenge then becomes, where can we find some common ground in this? Let's look for, instead of looking for the differences between us, let's look for the similarities between us. Let's look for the common ground. What do we have in common? Because the truth of the matter is, and I'm going out on a limb with science here and calling it a fact, we all experience the same things in life. Has anybody here never been hurt, either physically or emotionally? Of course not. Has anybody here ever never experienced grief or pain or joy, or has anyone felt like somebody's used them? We've all had the same experiences. We've all suffered losses. We've all suffered tragedy. Now, your tragedy might be different from my tragedy. It's still tragedy. It still musters that same emotion with it and that same feeling with it. So when we reach out to one another with our similarities rather than our differences, do you think maybe, just maybe, that this world, if collectively everybody did that this world would improve, and that collectively we would rise up to a different evolution of humanity in their thinking? I think so. And this is what I'm speaking to you about today. The evolution of humanity, the evolution of mankind, the evolution of spiritualism. We're the ones. You can't sit back and say, oh, I'll leave that to the next guy. Somebody will pick up the ball. No, you're it. You're it. There isn't anybody else. You can't look over your shoulder. When you look for the good, instead of looking for the differences, and don't take that as an invitation for conflict when somebody disagrees with you. Stay open-minded. Say, okay, their opinion is as valuable as yours. And when you do that, what you'll be doing is actually doing your part in raising collectively humanity to a greater height of consciousness. Spiritualism says, release those things, develop within yourself those attributes that support infinite intelligence, that support the cause of spiritualism, which is found in our principles. Let's treat each other as we know we should. God bless you.